Welcome to the Power Factor Show. Episode 127. Sponsored by Rainier Ballistics, Hodgdon Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hi, welcome to Power Factor. I'm Larry.
I'm Rick.
And this is our second episode of the Reading Rainbow.
The double rainbow.
Double rainbow.
Yes.
So this week we're going to review a couple of books. And but first we're going to start off with some unfinished business.
Right. Sounds like we've got kind of a backlog of stuff we need to take care of.
We do, yeah. So let's start with episode 122, Reloading with Ron. There was a question asked, how many 223 bullets, I believe it was on Ron's shelf, and he ducked out of the way while you guys added them all up, right? And the answer was 22,400.
Now we know who's hoarding all those 223
No
bullets.
Kidding. And so our winner on that one was AS Rowan 21 off of YouTube. So congratulations. You were the closest to the pin on that one. Unfortunately, I didn't write down what your answer was, but apparently you were the closest to the pin according to Steve. So this was Steve's
so
baby.
Nobody actually got it right?
Steve tells me he was extremely close. So whatever he did, he counted the boxes. He assumed 100 per box or whatever it was, and he did the math, and he came within a box, I think. So
cool.
So that was cool.
So we're going to do a couple of books. This is, again, our second Reading Rainbow episode. And our first book we're going to review is Practical Pistol by Ben Stoeger. Right. And it's the subtitle here is Fundamental Techniques in Competition Skills. And that's one of the things that I liked about it, is that it starts out with fundamental shooting techniques, essentially marksmanship. Yeah. And then he also kind of relates each marksmanship skill to how important it is in practical competition. So I think that's a kind of an interesting thing. Like he mentions more than once, for instance, if you've got a bullseye kind of a background where your focus is strictly on maximum accuracy, you've got some things you have to kind of undo to be a good practical pistol shooter, implementing those accuracy skills you have in a different arena. And that's one of the things I really like about the book, is that a lot of the aspects of it are, you've probably maybe already learned how to shoot. You've got some basic marksmanship skills, but then translating those skills into the practical pistol game. That's what I thought was the best part about essentially the first half of the book that talked about the fundamentals.
Right. I liked, one thing I like about Ben is that he's completely self-taught, so this is not just your usual run-of-the-mill kind of how to shoot, practical competitions. He's taken a lot of, he's taken in a lot of information after starting practical pistol competition, and he's read a lot of sources, but he's got his own spin on everything.
Yeah.
And he has this ability to, as it says in the foreword here, cut out the crap.
Yeah.
And that's completely Ben's style and persona, which I actually appreciate.
Yeah.
It's nice, and it's there's a lot of times you'll hear from different grandmaster level trainers that here's how you execute this particular skill. Like, here's how you enter a box. You always lead in with your strong foot, and another guy will say, no, you always lead in with your weak foot, right? And here Ben just says it doesn't matter, just get into the box, and it's just.
And I like too that he, even though he maybe has a technique that works the best for him, he doesn't necessarily totally dismiss other techniques just because it's not the one that he uses. Sure. And that's one of the things I think we've touched on before about instruction, is that if you go to a certain shooting school or seek out a certain person, they'll teach you the techniques that they use, and it's successful for them, and that's why they use it. But one of the things I did
struggle with it. So.
Yeah, one of the things that's nice about the book is that Ben recognizes that just because he's doing it a certain way and does it at a high level doesn't mean that somebody else isn't able to use a technique. But he's very good about, like you could do this and maybe it's not going to hurt,
right.
I mean, it's a valid alternative. It's just not the one that he uses. And I like that just because I think you are going to have, there's going to be certain things that you already do. And if every time you seek some help, the word is do it some other way.
Right.
I think it's nice to just have a sense that there are alternatives and to lay some of them out there. Say this is what's best for me, but there's also this and that, different drawing styles and stuff and different gripping styles. And I think it's important to give a little bit of justification for choosing the thing that you do choose, but then also acknowledging that, hey, there are other guys who are winning national championships that aren't doing it exactly this way. So look at it, look at the big picture, check into the different techniques. But I think he does a good job of providing justification for doing things the way that he does.
Right. Now, I just want to mention the first time I became aware of Ben Stoeger was actually when I was a member of the Beretta Forum, and I was more active on the Beretta Forum a long time ago. This might have been 2004, 2005. And here's this new user guy that shows up, he's got like 2 posts under his belt or something like that. And he's like, hi guys, I'm Ben Stoeger, and hey, look at this. And he had a scan of his USPSA classification card.
Right.
His initial classification was Grandmaster. So he did not come up through the ranks. He was born like, he's like a machine when he shoots. So he's like very robotic, at least he was back then.
Yeah.
And it was very impressive. I mean, I think he said, if I recall, this was some number of years ago, but that he had only fired a handgun for the first time within a year of being classified in USPSA. He shot, I think, a few IDPA matches. He shot enough USPSA matches to become classified, and he was instantly a master in IDPA. He was instantly a grandmaster in USPSA, and just has a real natural ability. But then, according to what we read in the book here, he has never been satisfied with the level he's at. It's not just, oh, well, I'm a grandmaster, therefore I'm done.
Right.
I mean, he's constantly been working at improving his skills. He's very analytical about every little thing he does. And one thing I like a lot in this book is he'll say, well, this guy says do it this way, this guy says do it that way. I've tried them both and I don't see a difference. So do it whichever way you're comfortable, because I personally haven't measured a difference in these two ways of executing this one particular technique. So it's kind of nice. It puts a guy like me at ease when I don't read a lot of training books, I don't watch a lot of training videos, I don't train, I don't practice, I just kind of show up and have fun, right? But it kind of puts me at ease because I'm sometimes thinking about other things I hear people talking about. So-and-so's book says you got to do it this way. This is the best way. And I'm like, yeah, really? I don't know. So when Ben says it doesn't matter if you do it this way or that way, if you lead with your strong foot or your weak foot into a box, for example, is just get in the box. Don't stress out about it. So that's kind of nice.
Yeah. I was impressed at the early part of the book, the first half that covers the basic kind of introduction to sight alignment and trigger squeeze and how to grip the gun and that stuff. That's stuff that's covered. I mean, we've covered that on this show. The first half dozen episodes were all about how to grip the gun, how to draw, and there's not that much variety, I don't think. I mean, if you read a book written by a top competitor, it's going to be pretty much the same about how they hold the gun and some of the techniques they use. But one of the things I did like about it is that it's presented in really easy to understand writing style. Sometimes one of the things you can about being really knowledgeable and really good at something doesn't necessarily mean you can convey it to somebody else.
Absolutely.
And so I think one of the things that really helps is if you can write proper English. It certainly helps. And I really thought it was easy to read. I mean, it was really easy to understand the points he's trying to make because the sentences are just well structured. I mean, and it seems like maybe a little thing, But if you're used to reading something, like technical writing, if you're used to reading something that where somebody's trying to explain to you how to do something, like if you've ever read instruction manuals on how to hook up your VCR, you have some experience with really poorly written instructions.
That's for sure.
And this is just really good. I mean, I just going through it. Just step by step, breaking it down. That's the other thing, is he'll even say, you might think that this part of the story belongs in this later chapter. I'm just going to touch on it here, and then we'll get back to it later.
Right.
And so that's kind of cool.
It'll make more sense when you get there, why I covered it over there.
Yeah. And so I appreciated that a lot, because I noticed when you're trying to teach something to somebody, they'll usually ask a question, and you'll think, oh, we're going to address that later. Mm-hmm. So do I take the time to explain it and answer it now, or just say, hey, just wait, we'll get it to it?
That is nice. So you're not stuck going, well, where's the part I'm expecting? Yeah. He says, I understand this is what you're expecting. It's over in the next chapter, or where it happens to be. Yeah. So that's pretty nice. I jotted down. There's a couple of blank pages here in the back, just for my own personal use, and kind of in prep for this show, I just jotted down a bunch of notes about some of the tips he gives, like this white wall drill. I jotted down just so you're, as a trigger control technique, you're not aiming the gun at any certain point, at a target, on a light switch, at a whatever. Just plain white wall, and just work the trigger and make sure those sights are not moving.
Relative to each other.
Yeah, right?
Exactly.
The sights stay stable, and they're not back and forth or jiggling up and down as you practice your trigger control.
Right.
Things like he talks about attaching the timer to your belt to judge your reaction time. So the timers, you can set a random par time. Or a random start time, rather. And so you hit the button and you just relax like normal. And then on the beep, slap the timer and check the time and see what's your reaction time. And that's to help you respond to the very earliest sound of the beep, and not wait for the 0.3 of a second beep.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to go. No, just get on it.
And aggressively get your hand to the gun. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the. He goes into some interesting stuff here. Like he's talking about on a difficult shot where it's going to take you longer to line up the shot. Some people have a tendency to take it all the way back to a slow draw.
Yeah. The 50-yard draw.
Yeah, it's almost like. I mean, that. And I just thought, it's cool to see it written down, because I know I'm very much guilty of that. If I've got a 25-yard shot, I'll be going like this, like. Getting it all lined up and everything. And I'm like going, why waste the time on a shot that's already going to be longer than your other shots?
Sure.
Why add another second to it with a slow draw? And so it's interesting for me to see stuff where somebody, I think one of the problems that I have is I don't have that self-analytical ability to say, this is what I'm doing wrong, and stop doing that, because it's counterproductive. But then I'm reading in the book, as I'm reading him talk, and Ben is talking about, don't do a really slow draw just because you're going to need to be more precise on the shot. And I'm like going, of course not. But I go, well, but that's exactly what I do,
Yeah.
And so it's nice just to have it written down here where you're nodding and going, oh, right. Yeah, that's exactly the way it is. And I was doing a lot of that, because I think the intro part tries to kind of break you of bad habits before you've developed them. It's trying to head you off at the pass before you screw up some stuff. And I think he does a really good job of kind of warning you about, this is what's going to happen, or you're going to find this. So it's almost like the idea that you're learn from somebody else's mistakes rather than your own.
One thing I found helpful was his, what chapter is this anyway? It's his target transition chapter. So, and he talks about these different aiming methods, and actually lists out 8 bullet points of different aiming methods, because sometimes you wonder, what are the top dogs seeing? What are their eyes telling them? How are they seeing the sights? Are they focused on the front side? Are they focused on the target? What are they looking at? Well, it all depends, of course, first of all, on the difficulty of the shot. And Ben kind of goes through the most gross aiming technique to the most fine precision aiming technique, like just simply having your arms aligned with the target. If the target is from me to the camera, that's all I need to know is my arms are pointing in that direction and I can make an A-zone hit.
Right.
You get halfway down, you see a blurry sight picture on the target while your vision is focused on the target. You get all the way down to the most precise is stable front sight, stable sight picture, holding the sight picture while the trigger is very carefully manipulated.
Right.
These are all different techniques that you have to do on the fly. You've probably been doing some of these automatically, but reading it here in print from a grandmaster that's won the last two, or been the top U.S. anyway, production shooter in the nation, it's nice to see these on paper and go, oh, okay, it's okay. What I'm doing is okay, and here's some other ways of doing it actually. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, and I think the whole first half of the book, which is basic techniques, draw, stance, grip. And I think it does as good a job as any. I mean, a lot of the books that you'll find, they're an introduction to practical shooting. They cover the same territory, and it's laid out very effectively. And I also, even though I've never shot production, I like books that are written about essentially a real gun.
Exactly.
Where it's not a book from somebody who's predominantly an open division shooter, for instance, where they're going to have techniques that are very different because of the pound-and-a-half trigger and the optics and the 30-round mag.
Sure.
And it's more practical.
It's service pistol based.
Yeah. So if you're shooting IDPA, you're shooting production in USPSA, this stuff carries over because he's dealing with double action triggers and things that at the highest levels of competition, you're not going to be concerned with that stuff. But he does a good job of just going over the different, and then even into things like malfunction clearance. You expect your gun's going to work, but you can't be taken by surprise and be befuddled by a malfunction. Yeah. So he goes into quite a bit of detail about kind of like how to assess what needs to be done. I mean, there's the idea that you have a malfunction and you could have sort of like an automated response to any malfunction, but depending on what the nature of the malfunction is, your response might not be appropriate. So he's a big fan of looking at things and analyzing what needs to be done. Everything from what malfunction am I having here, or looking at the gun on the reload, why are you looking at the target when the action is taking place here at the gun? You're not going to be able to shoot until you've got it reloaded. So look at the gun, and just things like that seem sort of intuitively correct, but having somebody who's been very successful doing it telling you that that's the way to do it, it kind of confirms that, oh, okay, I don't need to be looking. I mean, I think if you have an IDPA background where you're looking more at self-defense kind of themes, there's a lot of discussion of you should be looking at the target while you're reloading, because you take your eyes off the target, it may not be there when you look back. Well, of course, in USPSA, you're not simulating or pretending anything. The target is going to be right where it was. You look down, it was up there. When you look back up, it's still going to be there. So you don't have this kind of like underlying secondary sort of requirements built into your techniques. It's just do it as efficiently and quickly as you can. And anything you're doing, looking at it while you do it, it's probably going to turn out better, whether it's reloading or like even things like when Ben's talking about approaching cover. There's a little segment at the back on IDPA. He said, look at the ground where you're going to put your foot. Between here and there, I'm not shooting, I'm not reloading, I've got a few steps to arrive at cover. You want to arrive there ready to shoot. Well, look at the ground where you're supposed to put your foot and put it there. You don't have to stare at it, but it's the idea that, I think most people, you get a large proportion of your information from what you look at. And so these different techniques that he's explaining, look at them while you're doing them. And it seems kind of intuitive to me, but maybe not. Maybe you're concentrating on, as you're moving, like, oh, geez, I want to hold the gun up under my chin, right, not get too high, not too low, and you're ignoring the fact that what you're doing is actually running. So pay some attention to what you're doing to your feet, too.
One thing that's nice about when you talk about the malfunction drills is he says, you've already, let's say you're going to spend 2 seconds clearing a malfunction or something. Don't think you're going to make up those 2 seconds. If your normal, and now these are my words, but like if your normal pace is 8, you can't crank it up to 10
to make up
for that lost time. You're not comfortable shooting at a 10. Just get back to your regular scheduled program. Right?
Yeah. Accept that you lost 3 seconds clearing the malfunction and
just
get back
do
to
what
work.
you need to do to finish out the stage. don't sacrifice your aiming, don't sacrifice anything else, just get back onto it, and you just have to eat that malfunction time. So.
Yeah. Now, I actually thought maybe it's because I'm not a beginning shooter. I thought the second half of the book actually was the better part, just because I thought there was more stuff in there that I haven't seen, and maybe it's just because I'm not widely read on the topic, but just a lot of tips and explanations and stuff for some of the techniques. Especially, I thought the stage breakdown was really well done. I mean, he goes into the basic stuff, getting in and out of boxes, but when he starts getting into what I considered to be, it's not really breaking down a stage isn't really an advanced technique in the sense that everybody's got to do it. Even if you're a beginning shooter, you've got to break the stage down. But being very meticulous about how to break it down, what is it you're trying to accomplish with each little facet of it. I mean, I know when I look at a stage, because I'm often shooting, say, single stack, one of the very first things I think of is how many rounds are there, how many reloads does that make? You know, and then okay, so now I know I've got to do X number of reloads. So now where are they going to be? You know, and then and so you have this.
That's a big part of stage planning and single stack or production is where are my reloads going to be.
Right, and so he does a really good job, I think, of breaking that down into its kind of components. Like, what are the important things I need to do to break the stage down? And then he goes into things like how to differentiate between the way you would break down a field course versus a speed shoot or some kind of a drill, whether the hit factor is high or low, the shots, difficult shots, hoser stages. He uses the phrase hoser stage, field course, phrases I think everybody's familiar with. Right. And it's just really well presented. And I think too that, I appreciate I'm here on this talking about partial targets. Page 114 and 115. Right. And I remember reading something that some guy had written about engaging targets that have hardcover and no shoots attached to them. And he said something like, I always aim at the middle of the A zone, even if there's a no shoot blocking part of it. It's like I'm always using the same sight alignment. I'm always using the same trigger control. So the presence of a no shoot doesn't affect anything. And as soon as I read that, I thought, that's absolute BS. Right. And here in the book, there's an excellent illustration that essentially, explains if you've only got half the target to shoot at, you can shoot half of what's left, meaning what I think he calls the middle of the brown.
Sure. So here's like your acceptable aiming area has shifted when half the target's covered.
Exactly. And I just thought it's really, and again, it's one of those things where I read and I'm like going, oh, okay, somebody who's really successful does it the same way I do. It's kind of confirmation that I haven't been doing it wrong, because I give up on the certainty of an A hit every time in exchange for lessening the chance of hitting the hardcover or the non-threat. And I think that's valuable advice. I mean, whatever, if you're going to slow down considerably to get a down zero, I'm mixing up my terms here. Get an alpha instead of a Charlie, how much time are you going to waste on that? How much time are you going to spend refining your sight picture, prepping the trigger to save a point?
And then what's the risk of doing so?
And so I think this is extremely practical. All the instruction here, I just found it really practical. It wasn't, and I think also I like the fact that it's mostly mechanical stuff. He doesn't get into a lot of Zen. It's mostly stuff about.
That's a good point, and that's kind of back to where I was saying my impression of Ben was that he was very robotic in his shooting.
In a good way.
And you're right. And this book, now that you mention it, is very mechanical, and that's the way, being very analytical the way he is, that's how he makes his efficiency, executes everything efficiently on the stage.
Yeah, I remember Steve, I think, has read the Brian Enos book three times anyway, and I've tried to get through it, and it's just like,
it's tough.
Yeah, it's like poetry. I'm reading and I'm like going, I'm not really getting this.
Right, about halfway through the book, I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm supposed to have an out-of-body experience and observe myself going through the stage.
And this is kind of the opposite of that. This is a lot of just, how to react to what you see. You see the sights or you see the moving target. And it's just this kind of very practical application of the same kind of like analytical stuff you apply, I think, to your work or your school or whatever. I mean, it's not, you don't have to have this weird kind of alternate reality to understand it. It's just very basic stuff that anybody who's interested in practical shooting should be able to understand it, even if they're not able to do it. They should be able to understand it. Here's a technique I should be working on developing, doing it this way, because it's been demonstrated to be a successful way of doing it.
Yep, and then there's the chapter on dealing with match pressure. That one, I should have read that before the Inland Empire match, which you guys saw, last week, a couple weeks ago. There's a lot of interesting things in here that it's like, yeah, that's the way I was feeling when I was out there. Why, why did I add this pressure to myself when, actually the week before or 2 weeks, it was like the week before we shot a local match, and I beat one of the local masters. So we get out there to the sectional championship, and I'm like, watching you. I'm like, I'm coming after you,
Right.
And so what did I do? I just added pressure to myself. I'm saying, here, I'm focused on the result, not on the execution of the skill set you have to execute while you're out there in order to arrive at the result. You cannot be focused on the results you want. So
yeah. But I'd say, just in general, it's lots of good info. I mean, if you're an absolutely new shooter, you're not going to be reading through here going, oh, I don't get it. It's stuff that's understandable, I think, for even a new shooter. But yet there's enough kernels of more advanced information, advanced techniques, that you're going to be able to read through it. I mean, as an A-class shooter, I'm reading through it and going, oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's not so much something that I never thought about stepping into a box, but I just never really was able to think, what is it? What should I be trying to do when I'm stepping into the box? And I've read people's description of the strong foot people. They describe it one way, and the weak foot people, they describe it another way. And I'm kind of nodding as I'm reading both of them. But it's something I'd never really considered. The foot that goes into the box is the one that gets there first, kind of a thing. So actually having a preference for how certain things are supposed to be done, I think that's one of the nice things about reading from the perspective of a more advanced shooter is they have practiced it. They have delved into this, and they've already decided, okay, this is the best way to do it. But also at the same time, again, sometimes it'll be like, if this works for you, go ahead and do it that way. But this is what I've just determined is the best way to do it, and there's certainly no advantage to doing it that other way. And so at least, some alternate ideas are thrown out there, but still good, solid recommendations based on what works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another thing you'll find in the book is interesting, and I don't know if anyone else's book includes this, but he's got little blurbs from all the other, not all, but a lot of other grandmasters. He's got Matthew Mink in here, he's got Dave Savigny in here.
Mike Hughes is
in here, and there's all these other grandmaster type level shooters have offered their opinion on whatever that particular topic is for that chapter,
so you do get some, and some of it is just kind of confirming, it's sort of like, I'm going to put this helpful thing in here because this is the way I do it, but I'm going to let it be told to you by somebody else. But then you do see that you've got people using some slightly different techniques, and again, Ben will usually accept that, somebody else is successful doing it this other way, but in my experience, this is the way I do it. And I think that's a great way for somebody to approach it if you've put in the time and you're really good at something, to just say, you can look at other techniques, but this is the one that works for me.
Right, and so having said that, it's a thumbs up for this book, I think. I'm not an avid reader. I actually was kicked out of the Derek Zoolander Center for Kids Who Don't Read Good.
Oh, well, there you go.
But, like I say, I don't read a lot of these training books, but Ben, from what I hear, from his style and his way of doing things, he's actually a guy that I would be interested in taking a training course from as well. So
check it out. Practical Pistol, Fundamental Techniques and Competition Skills by Ben Stoeger.
And if you like, we can show off Ben's gun.
Okay.
So he never mentions it in the book, what gun he's holding up. But this is a Beretta Elite 2. And I mentioned at the top of the show that I was active on the Beretta forum, and this was the gun I had back then. I purchased this in 2003. This was designed specifically out of Beretta by Ernest Langdon, actually, designed specifically for production division. So it's still a production gun. It's on the production division list, of course. Ben is shooting it. And but there's a number of features that make this desirable over their standard Beretta 92F, FS, M9, what have you. I could go through those. There's, it's got a skeletonized hammer. Take a look at that. We'll show you some pictures. The one nice thing on the decocker is it springs back up ready to fire. That's what they call the G model. And so you cannot, when you're doing some kind of remedial action, you cannot accidentally put this on safe.
Okay.
It springs back up ready to go. This has got a checkered back strap. Front strap is both checkered aggressively. You've got some front cocking serrations. Dovetailed front sight, which your standard 92 doesn't have, so you can change out the front sight to anything you like. I've got a fiber optic in here. It's got a slightly beveled magazine well, extended magazine release.
That's reversible? You've put it around on
It's actually reversible. I've got it on the right side of the gun. And it's got a special target crown barrel. It's 4.7 inch instead of 4.9. That's most of it right there. It's got a flat magazine spring cap here, or what am I saying? Not magazine, mainspring cap. So you don't have a lanyard loop to hit your hand on when you're reloading. And it came with a lighter hammer spring as well, which I've got one even lighter than that in here at this point. But,
so if you have that gun and you read this book, you're well on your way to a national championship.
So between various things in my life, this book being one of them, I've been inspired to get this back. So I sold this gun to a friend, and I own it again. So so I'm gonna have some fun with this in IDPA and USPSA production.
Cool. All right. In keeping with the theme from the last Reading Rainbow, we're going to do a second book, and this is one that's been around. I think fans of guns and people who dislike guns alike have been reading this book. I think it was a New York Times bestseller. In fact, it won a Pulitzer Prize.
There you go.
And it's called The Gun. Kind of the small view of it is it's about the AK-47. You can see here on the spine of the dust cover, there's your AK-47. This was booked by, I held it up already, CJ, I'm going to say it's Chivers, could be Chivers. But the book, I think what the book does best is goes through the history of the machine gun, starting with the most primitive, let's say, not even a machine gun, like the Gatling gun. A lot of people consider the Gatling gun to be the first machine gun because it could fire, with a high rate of fire. But it's actually not a machine gun because it's manually operated. A machine gun suggests that the mechanism loads itself. So even though the Gatling gun was an early form of kind of automatic fire, right, it's not really a machine gun. I think the first credit for the first machine gun goes to the Maxim gun, and the kind of setting up the story in the book is the idea that originally the machine gun was a weapon used by the major world powers to oppress people. And so you look at the formation of the English Empire, you saw the English military able to essentially subjugate entire countries by sending an army over there with machine guns, and that gives them a sufficient military advantage that they can essentially rule the world. But of course, at that time, guns like the Gatling gun and the Maxim gun, they were fairly big and heavy. In some cases, they were on a carriage and needed to be dragged around by horses.
Oh, they had water jackets to cool the barrel.
Exactly. And so it was a gun that was used in these kind of big set-piece battles where you've got prepared positions and whatnot. And then the story develops as the machine gun is miniaturized. It's no longer towed around by horses. It can be handled by a single individual. And then kind of the tables are turned. The AK-47 becomes the weapon of, let's say, armies of liberation. And so you've got the AK-47 now being used by guerrillas and whatnot to throw off the yoke of the colonizing European powers and whatnot. So it's kind of comes full circle when you've got the major military powers in the 19th century, the tail end of the 19th century, towing their machine guns into battle behind horses and, almost applied it like as a form of artillery And then by the 1950s and into the 1960s, now the machine gun is a personal weapon that can be wielded by a single individual. And just the development of not just the AK-47, but the AK-47 is sort of seen as kind of the central player in this, turning this weapon into a weapon for the masses. I mean, there's a lot of criticism in here of the M16, how the M16 was kind of too little, too late. It came on the scene well after the AK-47, but still suffered from shortcomings. And it's interesting reading. I mean, it's very interesting reading. I mean, the AK-47, it's interesting too, I think, especially because assault weapons have been in the news lately, or constantly really for the last couple of years. And people think of assault weapons, assault rifles, as being some kind of a new invention. Sure. Like suddenly we're being terrorized by these assault weapons. Well, it's called the AK-47 because it was designed in 1947. I mean, it's been around a lot longer than most of the people who are debating whether it should be around any longer.
And the M16's 50 years old now, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so there is some interesting stuff in here about the development of the assault rifle in general, but the AK-47 in particular, how the Soviets developed the design, and then how it became this essentially distributed throughout the world. And then conversely, some of the issues that the U.S. had with the M16, which came 15 years later, but still had a lot of teething troubles, initially in combat. And sometimes I got the impression that the author was eager to make a point and sort of selectively chose examples of things that supported his point, and kind of ignored some things that I thought, well, if you'd included this piece of information, your point wouldn't have been so starkly made. But then at the same time, I think you owe it to the reader to include all the information. And so I'm not going to pick out a specific example, but I just felt like, for instance, the discussion that the AK-47 was sort of like, it had already established itself as this desirable and efficacious weapon, and then the U.S. is trying to come up with something like the AK-47, and that's the M16. And that part of the kind of the progression of the story, I thought it got kind of bogged down a little bit. I don't see the M16 as necessarily being the American equivalent of the AK-47. The AK-47 is something that you can build in the garage, almost literally. There's a good story in Shotgun News, couple issues back, it's probably quite a bit back now, maybe in December, of a gunsmithing project where the author just takes a flat sheet of metal and a big press, and he makes a die and folds this piece of extra heavy sheet metal into an AR receiver, and he essentially builds the rifle in his garage.
AK receiver.
AK receiver. And you're not gonna make an AR with tools in your garage.
I mean,
the AK-47 is perfectly designed for something that anybody can build it, anybody can use it, anybody can repair it, copy it. The M16, completely different, even though it had some of the same kind of its usage was very similar to the AK-47. It's a completely different animal. I mean, it's not made out of sheet metal. It's made out of aluminum forgings. It doesn't have a wood stock. It's got plastic. And so some of the elements, you can say, okay, the Russians had their kind of medium-powered rifle in 1947. We didn't get ours until the early 60s, but still didn't maybe learn as many lessons as we could have if we'd looked at the AK-47 more closely. And I don't know. I had a hard time accepting that we should regret that the M16 wasn't more like the AK-47, that it isn't built for exactly the same purpose. Somebody that coined the phrase, the AK-47 is for the masses and the M16 is for the classes. And to a certain extent, that's the way it is. I mean, you can't build the modern AR in a mud hut like you can an AK. It's evolved into a completely different kind of a weapon system. So I think, just in that time period, from let's say the early 50s to the mid 60s, I think there's some you can compare kind of the operational records of the two weapons, and say the M16 maybe comes up a little bit short in the comparison. But I think the idea that the U.S. military is going to build weapons for itself based on the same kind of principles that the Soviet government built their weapons. It's just like in everything we do. I would say probably, like you look at the Vietnam War, where the U.S. was probably utilizing weapons where we were using a missile to shoot down a Soviet supplied aircraft, and the missile probably cost more than the plane that we were shooting down. It's always been that way, that the U.S. has tried to use these kind of force multipliers, more advanced electronics and stuff. And I think it's the same thing with their small arms. You look at the AK; it's almost invariably seen as a fixed iron sights. You got a sling to throw it over your shoulder to carry it. But then you look at the M16, you've got your white lights, your infrared, your optics, all these accessories and stuff on it that has just kind of become a different weapon. And so in that context, again, I think there's some kind of shortcomings in this kind of equating the M16 with the AK-47. But if you're interested in the history of the development of automatic weapons, there's some really good stuff in here. So I think the broad picture, it's done really well. Some of the details, I think, it doesn't suffer to the extent that it makes me want to just say, "Oh, the book's crap." I think the book is valuable, but I think people who are really into the gun culture and they're gun people, they're not going to be as impressed with it as somebody who's looking for information about guns, because it's pitched at a level where somebody who's not a gun person is going to be able to read it and understand it. And there's some phrases and things in here, that I took kind of exception to how certain things were worded. But again, it was just, I think it was selected, the way things were worded and phrased and arranged. It was to satisfy the general reader, the person who saw that it was on the New York Times bestseller list and wanted to take a look at it, as opposed to somebody who'd already served in the military and was already really familiar with the weapon systems and wanted to read about it. It's not a technical book. It's more of a story about development of the machine gun in general and the AK in particular. But I liked it. There's some pictures in it. That's always good. There are some pictures in it. But yeah, it's a good book, and I would recommend it. But I think it's a kind of a book that I would say, make it part of your library. Don't make it an exclusive. Don't think that the truth is in here. It's just some good information. Really good stuff about how the AK proliferated across the world. That's probably the most interesting part of the story, is that how many millions and millions of AKs have been made, and how they found their way from Russia to throughout Eastern Europe into Asia, Middle East. And that's probably the more interesting part about it, was just how the weapon kind of, it's almost like it kind of got out of control of the Soviet Union. While the Soviet Union was in charge, they were able to make the guns and keep control of them. But then as the Soviet Union fell apart, that to a certain extent led to greater proliferation of the guns as they kind of got out of the control of the Soviets. But I'd say if you have a library, you like to read about guns, gun stories, it's a good book. Give it a read, but don't be too harsh on some of what I consider just be kind of shortcomings in some of the details about the weapons. But yeah, give it a read. I have a trivia question.
You do?
Yeah.
All right.
This is a kind of a fun one. It came to mind when I was thinking about we've done some episodes on revolver shooting, and so this came to mind. By the time this episode hits the airwaves, of course, the IDPA draft rule book will have been out for a couple of weeks. And so all IDPA shooters who are eagerly anticipating the arrival of the book have been pouring through it, looking for what's different, what's the same. Well, one of the things that I don't think is going to change, both because the rules still don't really address it, but because doesn't really seem to be any agreement on it, is the rules say if you're shooting a revolver, you're allowed up to 3 reloads. Now, the auto pistol divisions, you're allowed 2 reloads. Now, even if you're shooting in CDP, that means you're going to have probably 9 rounds in the gun and 16 rounds on the belt. So you're going into a string that is never going to require more than 18 rounds. And you've got at least, if you're shooting the auto pistol divisions, 25 rounds on you to satisfy an 18-round array. Well, of course, if you're shooting a revolver and you've got 2 reloads, that means you've only got 18,
Exactly
rounds,
18 rounds
for what might be an 18-round stage. Well, that kind of turns it into limited Vickers. So they said, okay, if you're shooting a revolver, you can carry a 3rd reload. Now, the rules say 2 reloads go immediately in front, go immediately in front of the holster on the strong side. The first one no more than an inch away from the holster. The second one no more than an inch away from the first. And then you can have a 3rd reload on your belt, but it must go behind the body center line. Now, if you put it on the weak side, you're going to be reaching over here to get at it, or you could put it behind the holster on the strong side, so you've got all 3 of your reloads on the same side. Now, the question is, if I have 2 reloads on my belt, and I've decided that I'm going to carry, as I've mentioned, I carry my 3rd reload in my pocket on the strong side.
Your pants pocket.
No, my vest. If I'm wearing a vest, an outer garment with a pocket, I'll put the 3rd reload in there, both because I can reach it then with my strong hand when I'm doing the reload, but also it gives me a little weight on the draw to help sweep it away.
Okay.
Now, the rule book also allows you to carry extra mags and extra ammo on you as long as you don't use it. So, for instance, you can come to the line with 3 magazines on your belt, one of them being the Barney mag. So you can put that in the gun, rack the slide. So as long as it's not one of your reload mags,
it's not in play.
It's not in play. So you can have your 2 reloads, and when you come at the line, you can have a 3rd one. But when the buzzer goes off, you can only have the 2 reloads on your belt. So, long-winded introduction. I'm shooting revolver divisions, either one in IDPA, either stock service revolver or enhanced service revolver. I've got 2 reloads on my belt. I'm shooting the course of fire. I do my first reload, pull a mag from the pocket, load up, keep shooting. Now it's time for a 2nd reload, and I go to the pocket and grab the 2nd reload as well. Now my question is, have I violated the rule that says I can carry 3 reloads? I've got 2 on my belt. I've pulled a 2nd one now out of the pocket. So does that drawing the 2nd one out of the pocket, well, I already have 2 on my belt that I haven't used yet, was I carrying 4 reloads? Or, as long as I don't use more than one of the reloads that's on my belt, am I okay? Because I use 1 on the belt and 2 from the pocket, I'm allowed to carry 3. So there's the question. I've got 2 on the belt, I draw on a 2nd one from the pocket. Have I already now broken a rule by having 4 reloads? Or am I still okay because I don't intend and am not going to use more than 3 of those 4 reloads?
Interesting.
So there's the question.
And the prize?
What is the prize?
We've got some Ben Stoeger books to give away.
Oh, there you go.
So,
there you go. He's a big
out.
revolver fan. I mean, there's lots of stuff in there about. No, actually, there isn't much in there about shooting revolvers. But
that Beretta trigger is much like a
revolver.
Double action trigger.
Yeah.
And if you want, I can even include a bookmark.
I heart explosions.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's
Explosives.
good. Yeah, that's good.
We'll throw a bookmark in for your book.
Okay. All right. So enjoy your reading. And until next week, I'm Rick.
And I'm Larry.
Have fun.
Hey.
Email us. We were just going to finish up, but we'd like to have you please contact us at the website, powerfactorshow.com. Send us an email.
Send us your trivia answers to powerfactorshow@gmail.com.
And of course, you can always like us on Facebook at facebook.com/powerfactorshow.
Good job.
Yeah,
first time.
I try. Yeah.
All right. See you next week.
See ya.